Are we introducing ourselves again?
Yes, I literally just said that, Jason Clifford.
Okay, let's do it then.
He doesn't listen, doesn't have this trouble with any of the other interviewers. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Talking About Who. We're on season 5, part 2. I'm still P-Bell and I am still joined by...
Hello, it's James. I'm still here.
And hello, it's Jason. I'm still here this side as well.
In part 1, we left you hanging as Jason was being sucked off into the vortex with... Jason, keep it together. We left you with the scores. We had given Tomb of the Cybermen 29 points, The Abominable Snowman 18.5 points, The Ice Warriors 17.5 points, and Enemy of the World 26.5 points. So it's all to play for. We have got 3 more stories, and we kick off with The Web of Fear. So, Jason, do you want to start us with The Web of Fear?
Actually, before I do, not only is this known as the monster season, but it's a monster length season as well, isn't it? I mean, it goes on for some time. This is properly long, isn't it? I love it. Web of Fear, right. Another one that we didn't have. We had 1 episode. Back came Phil, came up with the goods yet again, and we got Web of Fear almost. I had grown up with just the novelization and an imagination about this story. And when it came back, it did not disappoint in any way, shape, or form. A true classic in every sense of the word. Iconic London, menace in Yeti, Lethbridge Stewart, lots of soldiers, always good, proper base under siege, and the regulars at their very best. There is nothing bad I'm going to say about this story.
Nothing at all. Ooh.
Go on, James. James, you say something bad about it.
No, it is a very good story. I had on my sort of notes around Lethbridge Stewart. So it's the first story that you get to meet that character. There is great performances from all of the cast. I like the idea of them being in the underground. And the sets are really well done, actually. The sets, because you're not allowed to film in the underground, and people thought that they had actually filmed in the underground because the sets were so well built. So there's lots of things that I like. I think it's a shame that there is a bit missing, but we are going to have an animation of that later on this year, as we know. So yeah, I think we're back with the Yeti, and I know we talked about this earlier on in part 1 about whether or not the Yeti was more scary or less scary in the second one, but there's that sort of scene at the beginning where Travers reanimates it, and I think that it's almost a sort of like Hammer horror sort of, the mummies come alive kind of thing. I liked that, and I liked the visuals of the webbing everywhere and stuff like that. So yeah, I genuinely like this story.
I think perversely, only having the first episode for quite a while, the first episode, I don't know, episode 4 was great. Episode 1 might be the best part of the whole story. It's that's not to say the rest of it's not great, Jason. You can put the goggles back in. It's just I think part 1, if you want a cracking episode 1 and the rest of it was rubbish, episode 1 of the Web of Fear is great. It works. You're straight into that story. You're straight into the atmosphere. You're straight into the dynamic of it. The film stuff at Julius's museum and all that stuff is incredibly done with the music and the smashing window. That's all incredible. But I suppose you can't. I don't think you keep the pace with that. I do love it, and I think it's amazing that it came back. I like the novelization. I like the soundtrack. I just wonder whether did it slightly tarnish it? Were people not quite as excited by Web as they were excited by discovering Enemy, if that makes sense?
I think everybody automatically assumed Web was going to be a classic because it had such hype behind it already. So it comes back to the Tomb of the Cybermen. Tomb of the Cybermen always described as a true classic. Web of Fear always built up and always sits there as being the classic. And I do think for some, it probably was a little underwhelming. It had some big shoes to fill, whereas Enemy of the World didn't.
I mean, again, you don't want to pick too hard at the plot. I'm not entirely sure why the Great Intelligence has decided, shall I take over London or shall I just basically screw over the tube system? It works because you get the iconography of the tunnels and it all looks really scary and dark and beautifully designed. As a concept, as the concept, does it make a lot of sense in that sense? Does it matter for 25 minutes a week of adventure?
But no
But
different.
then doesn't.
No different though. To be fair, sorry, James, I'll just set this one out. No different, I suppose, to any of the future Earth type stories that we end up with, though, is it? I mean, why do the Autons decide to invade? Why do the Axons invade?
But the Autons don't invade Debenhams, do they? They invade the Earth. They go down the high street and they start just slaughtering people. They don't go through the turnstile and just take over Charing Cross. It's a bit more direct, isn't it?
But isn't this something that later Doctor Who, so more recent Doctor Who, has tried to kind of explain with the lunchbox with the map of the underground on it?
Yeah, with the is that in the Snowman?
It's in the Snowman, yeah.
No.
I think, I don't know whether that's just a playful thing where someone sat down and gone, why did they invade the underground? Oh, I know, let's give them a lunchbox with a map of the underground on it 20, 30 years later. But I think there is I like the underground setting, and you get Cybermen in the underground as well, in Colin Baker's tenure. And I think there's something fundamentally scary about a monster living in the underground. I think when you're a child, the underground is quite a smelly, busy, place. And I think having a monster running around it actually is quite scary.
Great place.
And having been on a rush hour train, it still is quite scary, but for different reasons.
But a great place for them to hide, though. Let's be honest. You're in the middle of central London, and you're hatching some sort of invasion plan for the Earth. Where else would you want to hide out other than the underground? You scare everyone away. You stop the trains from running, and then all of a sudden you're in a situation where no one's down there. You've got the perfect hiding place.
But they aren't hiding, though, are they? Because if you go near then they're out and about in Covent Garden, so they're not even hiding in the underground. It's not like the Invasion where they're just amassing Cybermen underground and then they burst free and then that's it. They're on the rampage. The Yeti have taken over the London transport system. It's kind of like, come on, lads, get in there, get up above ground. Come on, you could do the whole city. Maybe go north of Watford. You could take the Watford Gap. I don't know.
I'm sensing that we could have another series here of what the Great Intelligence did next.
I mean, not. It didn't have a big. And the gist is, I think, to be fair, isn't it that the Great Intelligence is trying to lure the Doctor?
Yeah, they want to trap the Doctor and take his mind and his knowledge,
so they can take the Watford
pretty much
Gap.
it. Yeah. Maybe they just, watched an episode of the Wombles and just decided that that's what we're going to do. Live underground and occasionally pop up in a park and pick up litter. It's...
Yeah, kill people dropping litter with your web gun.
Yeah.
But they don't pick up the bodies, do they? They just leave them covered in web. At least the Cybermen would recycle the bodies.
True.
So what do you think of Douglas Camfield's direction in this story, then?
who's going to take this one? Great. I mean, I think he probably is one of the greatest Doctor Who directors. I struggle to think of a story where he didn't do a good job. Cracking. I mean, especially when it comes to the film sequences. I mean, like I said in the first episode, the sequence in the museum. Then you have the battle sequence, episode 4 of Covent Garden, and all that. I mean, it's a shame in some ways that he didn't get to do a Spearhead from Space Town where it was all filmed, because I think that would have been pretty special, because you know he's got such a filmic quality to the way he works on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are elements of this, you know, this story which are really, really nice to look at. You know, really well filmed. I did write down here a lot of running down tunnels and running down corridors, which is, you know, standard Doctor Who stuff. But I think for me that provides a bit of a lag, but not massively.
But he had a tough direction gig on this one, though, to a degree, because, you know, the tunnels don't offer him much in the way of an opportunity. But I do think the way that he approached the studio filming, I think, was clever. He obviously only had the 1 or 2 pieces of tunnel, but it was very clever in the way it was done. And then you stitch in those film sequences, particularly the Covent Garden battle, and again, it just adds. He adds a level to Doctor Who. Douglas, in the way that he directs, and there's just a smoothness to the way that he compiles an episode and directs. I mean, it's a strong script from you know, Haseman and Lincoln, but he manages to take pretty much any script and can do something to elevate it to the next level.
It's nice as well to get Jack back as Professor Travers. Great makeup, I think, there from Sylvia James. So we love Sylvia here. So lots of shout out and love for Sylvia. But,
she was strong throughout the season, though, wasn't she? Throughout. But
it's a realistic. He doesn't look like he's been done up like an old man. He looks like an old man. It's a naturalistic sort of vibe. I mean, there are sort of elements I think they have recycled quite quickly from the Abominable Snowman. I mean, I think you have the Padma Sambhavar sort of disintegrate. You get a riff on that again. The sort of notion of the hacking up the pyramid, and there's a few bits which, again, I mean, it would have been months back for the viewer, so it's slightly unfair to come at it saying we know that you've reused this sort of element, because it would just be, well, hey, the Yeti are back, isn't this great? Do we think it's something that we I don't know what my point went halfway through that. Do you reckon I could get it animated and it would make more sense?
I was going to ask if you thought that the Yeti, you know, they came back twice in a season. Did you think that they thought this could be the next Dalek or Cyberman, or do you think that it was just, well, you know, we've got the costumes, we'll just use them again?
I think they were just holding out for the Quarks, but we don't get that. We don't get that yet. Isn't the popular tale that it was audience response that people loved Abominable Snowman? Unlike us, the audience loved it and they wanted more Yeti, and that was because, I mean, if it were a sort of budgety thing, I think they'd have just rehashed the costumes, and it is all new. Again, I don't like the beaky with the glowing eyes. I just don't. I'm not as good as the other ones. But having said that, I couldn't imagine the fatter Yetis on the underground. They'd have filled those corridors a bit more, I think. Yeah.
My feel is they were searching for the next big monsters. You know, the Ice Warriors, the Yeti. You know, these monsters are names that have come down the years in Doctor Who. You know, by this point, the Daleks had gone. You know, they were off to America to you know, with Terry Nation to have that next series. So presumably, you can only think that the BBC were looking for something that would replace or have some longevity and to bring them back twice in the same way as they did the Cybermen this season. So, you know, presumably there might have been some logic behind that. We don't know particularly, I suppose.
Interesting. I suppose we always think of the Yeti as one of the monsters, but they are just in these two stories. I mean, downtime aside, they are just in these two stories. And
Five Doctors cameo.
5 Doctors, but I mean, as an actual entity, as Doctor Who's facing the you know, it's interesting that the new series didn't in some ways have the bravery to say we're doing the great intelligence, let's just do the Yeti, let's go for this and really sort of, you know, riff on this. Is it a testament to the two stories that their impact was so great that it is something that's carried people think of the Yeti, even though it is essentially 12 episodes and 5 minutes in the 5 Doctors scratching at a rock?
It's a Yeti. I think it does. I think there's something about these stories that just pass on. You know, I never really seen them, but I remember my grandfather telling me about them. You know, and you get Sylvester gives it a name check in the Dalek story, doesn't he? He says, "Don't you remember the Yetis in the underground?" And just that line, you know, I remember my grandfather going, "Oh yeah, I remember that story," and I was like, I don't know what it is, and I think there is an impact, and the Yeti are memorable. You know, when you see clips of Doctor Who aliens, the Yeti are often in there, even though they're in so few stories.
I think we're robbed a little bit by episode 3 not having come back with the rest. And, you know, whatever you think of the story behind that episode and what happened to it, you know, rumor has it it's still out there. Rumor has it Phil knows where it is. You know, we'd love to see that episode because we are robbed of the very first appearance of Nick Courtney as the Brigadier by that episode not being back, I suppose. It's quite sad that we don't have it complete, I think.
I think I just sort of slightly pick up on what Jane said about it, the impact, I suppose, on a generation in terms of, I remember being at work once and my friend Anne, she knew I liked Doctor Who, and she just said to me the one straight, "Do you know the one I'd love to see? I'd love to see the one when I was a kid. There's one with the Yetis were on the underground." It's like, crikey, to have held on to that for 40 years or something. It just sort of shows that these were sort of, you know, they were myth makers, weren't they? I suppose in this period, it was a big thing, and the fact that these monsters have been brought back in different things. I mean, I know Yeti haven't come back in this series, but I mean, there's a lot of peripheral things that sort of involve these characters and these monsters. It's sort of a heady and yet, you know, still sort of a fresh feel. It's a you know, new thing, but it's a new iconic thing.
We're crying out for a return of the Yeti, and at some point.
Yeti and Colin and Mary, that's what we were crying out for. I mean, sadly we can't get Mary, but I mean, because Colin and the Yeti, I'll pitch it. I'll phone Cardiff later. I'm sure they'll be really glad to hear from me. So shall we come to some scores on Doctor Who and the Web of Fear? Let's go to James first.
So I gave Web of Fear a respectable 8.
8. And Jason, what do you give the Web of Fear?
Okay, I said at the top when we started talking about this that I think this is an absolute classic. My only sadness is that we don't have episode 3, which I've mentioned a couple of times. It makes me sad, but you know, ultimately it was everything I expected it to be, and probably just a little bit more. I am going to take the lead of Mr. Ballard, and this is my 10 for this season. Woo! So it's a 10 from Len on the Web of Fear.
I am very impressed that you'd written that out. At least you didn't show us your paddle.
This is not the right video for that.
Indeed, it isn't. Well, I'm not going to give it 10. I do really like it. I like a lot about it. I don't think I quite like it as much as I like The Enemy of the World. It's only a slight difference. So I'm giving the Web of Fear 8.5. Ooh, which brings Web of Fear in at 26.5.
Not bad.
Not going to be the season winner.
What can you do? What can you do? There's still 2 more stories. It might not even finish second. we move on to the penultimate story now, which is Fury from the Deep. So who wants to dive into the foam first?
I feel that the first thing I'm going to have to say is Mr. Quill. Just the still of Mr. Quill with his mouth open is the thing that I just remember the most of this episode. And we talked briefly earlier around the animations, and this is one for me that I've seen all the animation the whole way through. It's the first time the Doctor uses his sonic screwdriver when he's examining the pipe outside. I think it's a traditional Doctor Who story that's like a monster in the pipes sort of thing. Killer seaweed taking over people. An enjoyable romp is how I would describe it.
I am hoping beyond hope that Jason has got some seaweed there as a prompt prop.
It's going to sort of crawl out up his neck and just sort of like come out the sides.
I'm going to disappoint you. I don't actually have any seaweed in the house. No, I'm landlocked here. It's a bit like Bullseye in Nottingham. There is no sea anywhere close, so there's no seaweed. I'm going to pick up a couple of bits of points that James made. It is a good story. It's defined as a classic. It's one of the most wanted stories to be recovered, that people would like recovered. It's a great opportunity for them to bring the foam machine out. It's very well used, as we know from the clips that we've seen from later episodes. Mr. Quill and Mr. Oak are genuinely quite scary, but this is a story that, having had the opportunity to revisit during the animation, and whilst I think the animation is really good for this story, I'm afraid this story really lacks in a number of areas, and it isn't a fan favorite of mine. It's too long. I've said it a couple of times this video, but it's too long at 6, needs to be 4. It's very, very padded and a bit ploddy. And of course, it's Victoria's departure, so quite bittersweet at the end.
Yeah, the actual departure, I have an issue with, in the fact that she just randomly goes off to some strange family. It's kind of like, when we were talking about the first episode about the TARDIS dynamic and how she fitted in so well, and it's kind of like she's got to the end of this season and just gone, do you know what? I hate this. There's monsters everywhere. Everybody dies. I'm just going to go off with this family. And I find that really weird.
I think it's actually quite well. I like the build through it. You can tell quite early doors that this is going to be her last story, because she's like, oh God, can't we just land somewhere nice where where people aren't trying to kill us and there isn't a monster? And I guess, as a character journey, she's gone from being a sort of sheltered Victorian miss in a house that's then had her father killed, extracted from that situation. She's been forced to go on it. She hasn't really had a lot of choice in joining the Doctor, because essentially she hasn't got anything else to do. She has to join him because the house she grew up in has been blown up. Everyone she knows essentially, dead. So she's been sent on this journey, and she has had a sort of relentless, oh God, there's an ice war and there's a Simon. She's had a lot. And I kind of think that later, I was thinking about this earlier actually, they try it with Janet in Resurrection when Tegan goes. And I feel with Tegan, she literally just at the end of it goes, do you know, a lot of people have died. I'm over this shit. Whereas actually, there's other stories where she could have said the same reaction. And I feel with this that she's back on a sort of an Earth norm. There's a sort of domestic. I'm not quite sure whether the Harrises necessarily are screaming out for the adoption situation. There are references to Mrs. Harris being an alcoholic. I'm not going to lie to you. Is she drunk again? It's in there. They're not necessarily, But anyway, Victoria's quite old. She can cope with all that. But I do like the progression, and I think one of the heartbreaking things, I mean, because when they found the Ice Warriors, one of the tins was labeled Fury 6, wasn't it? And it wasn't Fury, it was something else. Oh my word, I think if we had episode 6, I think Victoria's departure, I think we'd all be wrecks, because that moment she's like, please don't go without saying goodbye.
Mm.
And he's gone, look. Because I think actually in some ways this is quite a personal story. I think there's a lot of associations with Fury for us. I mean, our first ever convention was Fury Reunion, so to us there's a sort of place for it. I wouldn't swear to it being the greatest story ever. There's a lot of faults in there. Again, would those faults be more forgivable if we could see it? I mean, if you look at the censor clips, it's good, it's well directed. Hugh David, we haven't got a lot of examples of his Doctor Who because obviously the ones Highlanders, he's obviously knows what he's doing. It's great. Van Luten's in the impeller shaft, that's cracking. The seaweed outtakes that we've got, great stuff. Maggie Harris being gassed by Oak and Quill, I mean, they are beautiful images which you sort of don't get on audio. I think you sort of lose that, and maybe with the arms and the animation, I don't know.
There was quite a bit made about the sort of seaweed and the bits in the animation that people said it wasn't necessarily how it was when they filmed it, but the animation gives you the opportunity to do something that you wouldn't necessarily have been able to film at that time. And
the animation is not trying to recreate the original film. It's giving us an interpretation of the story. And you know, I've said a couple of times, you know, I don't get on with teleclips or the telesnaps. So for me, an animation is an easier watch. But I am with Paul on this. I do think we'd revisit this story, or I'd revisit this story in a slightly different way if I had the original film of it. And therefore, I think this does become a must-want for all Doctor Who fans, because I think, again, I would agree. I think, you know, episode 6 in particular would be a great one to have back in the archive.
I thought you'd be a bigger fan, Jason, because it's got Margaret John in it.
Oh, well, you know, not one character does the story make a 10. I mean, Margaret John is a fabulous actress, and her Gavin and Stacey days for me are just so reminiscent of my life back in Wales.
She's one of, I mean, there aren't that many people that have been in classic Doctor Who and then come into New Who. I hate saying New Who, but sort of more recent Doctor Who, because she was in The Idiot Lantern as the grandmother that had her face sucked off. But you know, again, it's that kind of, I like some of the casting in this as well. I think it's really strong. Weirdly, I feel like I'm showing a lot of love, and you two are lukewarm for this one.
No, not at all. If I were to pick one a Doctor Who story that I would like to see tomorrow return to the archive, it would be this one. Hands down, it would be the story that I want back. I mean, bless him, Victor always used to say it's not really the slide. It's not. There's a lot of the slide in this, and there is nothing wrong in that. If you listen to the slide, you get Roger Delgado, but there is nothing wrong in that, and it's a great story. I just think it's the iconicity and the imagery, I think, that make it. And I think if you've got dark impeller shafts and you've got torchlight and you've got Maggie walking into the sea I mean, it doesn't all quite make sense, but her walking into the sea is an iconic shot. As a cliffhanger, you're walking into the sea and like has she killed us? What's she done? That is something you sort of need to see. And if you could see that clip, it would be incredible. And if it was all done correctly, you know, that would be incredible. But listening to it on audio, where you have the music and, you know, Fraser saying Maggie walks motionlessly into the sea, music, then end credits, it's like, oh, okay. And there isn't anything you can do about that. You can't unerase it. But I can't score this as high as I would necessarily score it if I could see it, and I know it's not its fault that it doesn't exist, if that makes sense.
And I think
Yeah,
this
no,
has
that makes sense.
definitely got the enemy of the world syndrome about it, insofar as, you know, I don't think we would have rated, I wouldn't rate Enemy of the World as high if I didn't have the visuals for it. So I do think that any score that I'm going to end up giving this is based on what I can tell of the story, plus a combination of some of the animation in there. But, you know, if we had visuals, I think this would probably be a little bit higher in my estimation, unfortunately.
I mean, I'll do a small, slightly indulgent anecdote here, in that when me and Debs were writing the book, her autobiography, her mum lived in Frinton-on-Sea, so we did quite a bit of the writing in Frinton. And during a break from writing, we took a walk down to the beach because, you know, it's beach, you know, you go do sandcastles. Anyway, we were the two of us walking just along the beach and sort of slightly under this sort of bit of piering, and there was seaweed and there's all foam spitting around it, and I was like, seaweed and foam, and she just looks, she went, should I scream? Should I scream? It's like, oh my God, I've got my own live version of Fury from the Deep, and, you know, how many people got that, hey? So I think we're probably heading towards scores on Fury.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there are any other last minute thoughts. I don't want to tread on it.
No, I think we can go to scores on this one.
Okay, so get in your dinghy, Clifford. What score are you going to give Fury from the Deep?
My dinghy is bobbing along nicely. As I've said, it's a story that lacks the real visual, but also a story that, until I saw those visuals, I feel just is a little bit saggy in the middle. Very tight 4-part, but it's not brilliant 6-part. It's got the departure of Debs as Victoria. It's got a couple of very classic elements in there. I'm going to go 7.5.
7.5. James, where are you at with your bobble hat?
Well, I am going to go a fraction higher than that, because this is a very rare occasion where I don't mind it being saggy in the middle, because I do find the ending a bit odd. However, I'm going to score an 8.
An 8, which I'm also going to score an 8. Ooh, see?
Wow.
Which brings
Jason's doing his best Mr. Quill impression there with his mouth wide open.
Come on, we all know he's Mrs. Harris. We all know. That gives Fury from the Deep 23.5.
Quite respectful.
And now we shoot up into the sky above the North Sea and head to the wheel in space. So, phase 1, who wants to start? Go on, Jason, you look like you love this one.
Okay, so actually I forgot to mention while we were on Fury from the Deep, but I can pick it up because it's sort of where we start with this story. Why does the TARDIS land on the sea?
Because it looks great, and then they get to go in a dinghy.
It's amazing. I can only imagine what that was like. The wheel in space. So what a season. We're approaching the end of the monster season. And we're back into space, as you've said, but we end where we started, and we have the Cybermen back. But we have a slightly different design of the Cybermen. And where we talked about the Tomb and Moon-based versions earlier on, I'm not a massive fan of the facelift that the Cybermen get in this story. And I would say that this particular design is probably one of my lower rated designs. You know, the teardrop motif design, as I call it. But nevertheless, they're back. Episode 1 feels like it's from a completely different story, from what I can tell from the fact, again, we don't have visuals. I don't get the servo robot. I'm sure we'll discuss it as we go. However, the rest of the story is pretty good fare. it's a little bit confusing. We've only got 2 episodes, so I do struggle a little bit following the plot on this one. Fabulous that we get Wendy introduced in this story, and quite a juxtaposition against where we were with the character of Victoria. So lots going for it. I'm sure we'll flush out a bit more detail as we come through it.
James, are you a fan of Wheel in Space?
It's not my highest rated Cyberman story, I have to say. And again, this suffers a bit from having lots of it missing and then having to read about it, or you know, I'm sure you listened to the audios or read the book. It just, again, not being able to see the visual. So like you were saying about the servo robot, and the servo robot sort of attaches from the ship to the wheel, and then you've got Cybermen coming out, and you've got Cybermats coming out of these sort of projectiles and things, and you're kind of reading that going, that sounds great, but I can't actually picture what that actually looks like. This suffers a bit as well. You were saying about earlier on, Paul, I think it was just yourself, who were talking about the ionizer in a previous story about use the ionizer, don't use the ionizer. And again, this one's got the thing with the laser, it's like, oh, well, you know, we've depleted your mineral or whatever it is that you need to use to get the laser. So you've got to go across to the other ship to go and find something. And then it's like, really? It seems to go backwards and forwards on that sort of pivot. I know Jason says that I am an encyclopedia of these things, so I do have an exciting fact about this, that the spacesuits that were worn ended up being in Star Wars.
Oh, wow.
So the spacesuits that Zoe and Jamie wear are actually the costume for Bosk, the bounty hunter in the first 2, well, New Hope and Empire Strikes Back.
So Bosk must be about 4 foot tall then.
And tiny.
Does that help you score for this story?
Marginally.
I think, you know, my abiding memory of the first time I saw this, and I kept believing it even after the credits, I thought Judi Dench was in this. I was absolutely convinced that Judi Dench was in it, and I looked it up, and every time it came out, and obviously she's not in it. It clearly it is not Judi Dench, it's Anne Riddler, and that's fine. But for many, many years, much as I always used to think Lalla Ward was Jane Asher, I was convinced that actually Judi Dench was in The Wheel in Space. I mean, in some world, in some place, and I'd like to hope this is true, she is, in an alternative dimension, the star of The Wheel in Space.
Imagine if she turned it down. She actually went for the role and she turned it down, or didn't get it.
They turned her down. They were like,
yeah,
you know what, you're all right. You're good, but you're not great. It's interesting, and I think actually, again, forward thinking, I suppose, that they are attempting a multinational cast. I mean, they've done it in a very 60s way, and Chang obviously is not Chinese, etc. But I like the notion that they've thought, this is a space wheel, it's in the future, we are not going to just have everybody's speaking received pronunciation, we're going to have different parts of the world and different nationality and culture, and I like that. The Cyberman Plan, I mean, in terms of strategy, I mean, I think they've over analyzed their plan here. I think everything being in phase 1 completed, okay, have ready break phase 2 completed, okay. I mean, you can imagine them ordering the stationery with the branding on it just so they could write their plan out and make sure it was all very neat. I mean, if you sort of stretch it, they have little egg things, and then they hatch out the eggs, and then they've got to lure them to the carrot, and you can see why they've had to write the phases down so they can check them off, because it's a little bit convoluted. Why not just become in your big spaceship and just take over the wheel? Why go through all the effort of smuggling them and spacewalking them? It you know, if you think too hard, it doesn't make a great deal of sense on that front.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say this. They spend so long sort of like hiding in the shadows, doing their little like dastardly plots, and you know, occasionally just picking one of them off, and then they all sort of just walk out in space, and you're kind of like, what?
But you know what? That said, I think there's a lot of very great, and again, this is another one that I used to enjoy the audio, the soundtrack to. There's a lot of great stuff. And I think, again, 4 and 5 are probably where the party's at, because they're lurking in the loading bays and stuff. There's a very dark moment where Tanya is in the control, and she says, someone's just operated the incinerator. We'll have to run a check on that later. The incinerator is the Cybermen disposing of Chang's body. They've incinerated him. He's gone. So it's actually surprisingly quite a ghoulish moment. It's, you know, 6 parts it is playing its sort of welcome, but I like the atmosphere of it. I like the space of it. I like the fact that we are out in space and we're having a space adventure, to use the stock title music. Leo Ryan, nothing too shabby there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you probably could get away with watching episodes 3 and 6, and you've not missed too many steps in the Cyber Plan, and it's all good. But that said, I mean, allegedly it's one of the more likely ones to turn up. Who knows? But is it one that we would like to see more of, or are we happy with the 2 parts we've got?
Come on, Phil, do your work. Bring us this one back.
I think I would like to see more. I think, but I would do so with a sense of trepidation that actually would it necessarily improve it. But you know, I think that I would like a few more pieces of that jigsaw rather than just the ones that we have.
I mean, I slightly disagree with Jason on the cyber design. I love the Wheel in Space Cybermen. Maybe it's just I'm into wetsuits, but Wheel in Space Cybermen, they look good. I like that, and I like the teardrop thing. I like that sort of nasty thing, because they don't have real emotion. So there's a sort of affected emotion on the face that isn't genuine. I like that riff on it. Yeah, I suppose the biggest thing about the story is Wendy coming in as Zoe. I mean, she's one of my favorites, but don't say. She has got a great attack and an energy, and she's instantly charismatic. She can, you know, I think she's very underrated actually as a companion. I don't think we talk about Zoe enough. She's great. And again, straight into the chemistry. I mean, you would think actually it'd be slightly difficult, but you know, kudos in terms of, you know, Wendy's relationship with Pat and Fraser, that actually, no, there isn't a sort of awkward, this isn't working, it's straight into it. But it's a different dynamic. Again, it brings out a different side to Jamie.
Yeah, it's a complete contrast, and I think that was needed. It was going to have to be a complete contrast when they replaced Debs, because, you know, I've got to say, I'm not really a huge fan of pitching the Doctor with companions, so Wendy is technically, you know, she's a genius to a degree, isn't she? So you know, the character of Zoe is like, I'm a genius. So you put somebody with the Doctor who's in an equal sort of intellect. I'm not a big fan, and I'm never sure that those dynamics work in Doctor Who.
I think it does work because of Troughton's particular Doctor characteristics. I think that if you'd put her with other Doctors, you know, like Tom, I think that would have been an absolute hellish match. But actually, you know, Troughton's Doctor is a bit more laid back, and is, you know, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to let you speak. You know, then I'll tell you what you did wrong. You know, and you see that dynamic in other stories where, you know, she's being all brainy and being it all know-it-all, and he comes along and goes, well, actually, you know, I could have done that myself, but he just lets her do it. You know, and I like that. I think that works well. I think that Troughton's Doctor doesn't have the ego or the, you know, the pride that some of the other Doctors do, and so that actually works in that respect. He's quite happy to let her be the brainy one rather than having to outdo her or get annoyed by her. So I think that works.
I'm quite glad we have a lot of season 6 to be able to evaluate how well they all work together.
I think a huge amount of it comes down to Wendy's performance. I think Brainchild, Proper Little Brainchild. I think you could easily do that as a very nauseating thing, because unless you've got a bit of charm, it's quite a flat line on a character. But I mean, there are sort of elements. She does sort of question. There's sort of she's sort of questioning if being a logical person's a great thing. So you can sort of see where the journey is going to go with the character to an extent. But yeah, and it is great for the comedy sort of element of, you know, Jamie trying to pretend he knows what's happening, and you know, and she knows he doesn't know, and but again, there's an affection there still. It's not a malicious sort of, you know, setup. And then of course we head off to a repeat of the Evil of the Daleks, which we're not going to be discussing. We'll be here forever.
But it's kind of interesting, isn't it? We started the season by coming out of Evil of the Daleks, and we end the season going back into Evil of the Daleks. It is quite bizarre, isn't it?
I mean, the original plan / hope was to have Cybermen versus Daleks for this story. That was the original intention, which obviously we got in the end with Army of Ghosts. I don't know whether the budget would. In my head, I can't quite think of a 1968 studio Cybermen versus Daleks. I mean, especially with 2 Cybermen. I mean, it'd be 2 Cybermen, 3 Daleks. It would have been. I can't in my head tally what that could have looked like in a.
How many mirrors and sort of, you know, different camera angles would you need to make it look like there was an army of them?
But the floaty Cybermen from the end of it, they'd had to have hundreds of those. I mean, perhaps we should be thankful. I mean, it is slightly painfully obvious that there are just the 2 of them, which, you know, there's nothing wrong in being in pairs, but yeah, kind of Cybermen, when they come back in the invasion and they're marching along, there is something about a relentless amount of them. 2 of them slightly feels that like they've been left out from the group because they're not friendly enough or something. I don't know.
I think sometimes when you've got the Cybermen and the Daleks, when there's just one of them, I think they can be done really well and have a real sense of menace. I find my issue with more recent Cybermen and Doctor Who Dalek stories is because there are thousands of them, you kind of just go, well, they're all going to get blown up in a minute anyway. It's like there's no real sense of malice, and I feel sometimes when there's one, there's a real sort of, you know, scariness about that. But I think you're right in this story that because there's 2, you're kind of like, okay, well, it's like a double act that's not very funny. It's just like there's 2 of them and a couple of Cybermats.
Some of that can come down to the direction, though, as well. And, you know, we've seen 3 Daleks before, and we've seen how well that can be directed. At times it can be really poorly directed. So again, I think some of the direction, if you've only got 2 Cybermen, could have directed it possibly to make it look a little bit more so. But I know it was in the sequence when they're coming across in space. But you know, if it's obvious it's 2, then potentially the direction may have fallen down slightly.
Yeah.
I mean, Tristan allegedly overspent on it, which is apparently why he didn't get to come back again with it. I quite like the direction on it. I do. It's difficult to do space well, I think. To me, it's why I've never liked Star Trek. I find Star Trek very flat, very boring. I can't watch it. Wheel in Space, I can watch, and so to my mind, that's someone doing something well. I mean, imagine if Wendy, Zoe, at the end had watched the Evil of the Daleks and gone, do you know what? No, it's all right. Take me back to the wheel. I mean, she's lucky that he picked that story to an extent. I mean, if he'd have picked something a little less exciting, if he said, let me tell you about my time where I was at the OK Corral. It could have been the end of a beautiful relationship quite early doors. Are we happy to go towards a score on the Wheel in Space?
Yes.
I'll just add one more thing from my pad. Sorry, Jason. So the guest star Donald Sumter, who then went on to be President of Gallifrey.
Indeed, he did. Via a submarine in the Sea Devils.
In the Sea Devils. I mean, what a career he had.
And whilst we're on the YouTube, Claire Jenkins is one of the few people we have not been able to find. There's a radio presenter with the same name that has had a lot of mail from Doctor Who fans over the years and has had to write back and say, sorry, I don't know what the Wheel in Space is. So Claire Jenkins, if anyone out there knows where she is, if she's watching, yeah, please get in touch. That was an appeal on behalf of Fantom Films.
We love to see it.
So, scores on the Wheel in Space. Jason.
Oh, okay.
Go on, James. You go for it.
Oh, okay. So I scored Wheel in Space a 7.
Okay.
Solid 7.
A good solid.
A solid 7.
Solid 7.
I've not said it. I'm going to say solid 7.
Solid 7. That's the one. I'm in a similar place to you, James, but I'm just a little bit lower, and I'm scoring the Wheel in Space at 6.5.
Are you going lower than Jason?
Darling, I don't know anyone who could. So, for the Wheel in Space, drum roll, I'm going to give it an 8.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Wow.
Who knew? I'm going to give it's an 8 for, once for every mean thing I've said to Wendy Pabry during a Utopia quiz.
You should be giving it 800 on that basis.
It's about 8, which brings it in at 21.5.
Okay.
Which is my age.
Wow.
Coincidentally.
Really?
Ish. Right. So, season 5.
Playing 30 though, aren't you?
Pardon?
Playing 30?
Am I 30?
Are you playing 30 or are you playing 30 to 40?
I can play it all. So in reverse order, we have got least popular of season 5 with us was the Ice Warriors at 17.5.
Oh.
I'm surprised at that.
The Abominable Snowman, 18.5. The Wheel in Space, 21.5. I love all these halves. Fractional's fun. Wheel in Space, 21.5.
I think all good reviewers have to have a little half in their pocket somewhere along the line.
But not a 3/4. You don't want to go crazy.
No, we're not going mad.
In the Deep, 23.5. Joint second, Web and Enemy on 26.5 each.
Ooh.
Which means our hit of season 5 was Tomb of the Cybermen on 29.
Very good result.
It was downhill after the first story. Is that what we were saying? Anyway.
It's a shame that we've still got so much missing from this season, I think.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, James.
Our pleasure as
Very
always.
welcome.
If you'd like to click, like, and subscribe, we shall be back very soon. So, bye-bye for now.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.